one night removed from one of the top pay-per-views of the year. Not because it was majorly successful as far as ratings are concerned, but just because it was a step forward for a lot of the storylines going on right now, and a building block pay-per-view like Unforgiven is supposed to be, because we moved forward a little bit with The Undertaker defeating Ric Flair and Finlay in the main event to win the world title. Chris Candido beat Brian Lee to win the Intercontinental title. Jesus Castillo won a 25-man gauntlet for the gold to become the Hardcore champion. Brett finally returns for the first time since King of the Ring to fight Owen. To work with Owen. Or to encounter Owen. It messed itself up. There was also supposed to be a segment at the end of the show where Ric Flair is laid out at the end of the show by a mystery attacker, but apparently it didn't count. Go figure. Steve Austin, Heyman, and Pillman take a step forward. Debbie and Medusa take a step forward. Jeff Jarrett and 1-2-3 Kid take a step forward. The Harris twins win the tag team titles. Yokozuna finally defeats El Gigante. And now we are building our way towards the next pay-per-view, SummerSlam. With that quick recap out of the way, let's move to Monday Night Raw. Now that a lot of this episode is set up, I can pick it up where you won't be seeing a lot of the nonsense. You'll be getting a lot of the explanations instead of double meanings. Well, as you noticed, Flair lost the title to The Undertaker last night at Unforgiven, but the attention quickly shifted away from that and over to Flair getting assaulted to end the show. And the question remains, who has been messing with the Nature Boy? Because a car ran him over in the parking lot 2 weeks ago, or attempted to, and then he found a note left on one of his bags in his locker room, but it doesn't show up to show the camera, and for whatever reason, again, it's not showing up on the results. Go figure. All I know is there's a mystery going on, and there's not much known about who or why. But we'll be going through the show bit by bit in a little bit. We just need to finish building the show and putting it together. With me and Gene. Gene asks Lee about last night, and Brian is honest, saying, they got me. Again, we'll go more in depth in that in a minute, once we get to the point where we are going through the show. Tama versus Mark Marrow. Yeah, we go with that one. Debbie explains that she feels happy to have beaten Medusa, but still feels like something is missing. And then we move to the main event with my favorite guy and yours, Owen Hart, against Scorpio in the main event. Scorpio is leaving, so actually I think this is his last episode of Raw, so him going out on his back is an ideal situation. And I'm just going to make note of this. JJ Dillon will be here next week to address the world title, basically what's going to happen at SummerSlam, and an update on Ric Flair. JJ Dillon will be here next week to address SummerSlam, and update on Ric Flair. I guess, actually, let's go with this one and shorten it down to 10 minutes. Alright, we got the show booked. Now, as I mentioned, the two biggest takeaways from Unforgiven are that Ric Flair is no longer the world champion. Somebody attacked him, and somebody attacked him, and that The Undertaker has the title now. Jerry Lynn puts over Terry Funk. Jerry Lynn's on his way out the door as well. Jerry was actually brought in to be a part of the Cruiserweight division, but the experiment failed, and I decided to go with the Hardcore division instead. As you saw with Jesus Castillo. Or I might have said with Jesus Castillo. But now, as you saw me book the Brian Lee segment earlier, Chris Candido and Sonny talk about going back, I want to say to April or May, when Chris was feuding with Vader and drew Vader out to the ring. Vader came out and Chris made a run for it, leaving Sonny behind and leaving Sonny in the ring with Vader. After that, Sonny did not mention, talk to, want to be seen with, or even acknowledge the existence of Chris Candido. And she started managing Vader, and then once things didn't work out with Vader, she moved back to Brian Lee, her former friend through association with Chris. And then last night at Unforgiven, Sonny managing Brian Lee during the Intercontinental title match turned her back on Brian Lee, siding with Candido, allowing Candido to become IC champion. Jacques Rougeau wins another match. Jacques Rougeau actually just came back last week. He was gone he's been gone for the last 3 years. I believe he went back up to Canada. You know, I had him at the beginning as the Mountie. And then after a couple of years, you know, I went through everything I could with him, so I let him go. Now he's back as a babyface. He's back after 3 years, and I'm gonna see what can happen with him. Speaking of Ric Flair, the Honky Tonk Man had his interview segment, and his guest was Ricky Steamboat, who talks about Ric Flair and what's been going on with the Nature Boy. As I mentioned, 2 weeks ago, Ric Flair almost got hit by a car leaving the arena. Last week, he found a note on his bag. Nobody saw the note. At the pay-per-view, Flair got attacked. And now Flair's not here tonight. Raven cuts a cryptic promo talking about weakness and that it won't be tolerated anymore, but if it is shown, it will be dealt with. Cracks are starting to form in his faction after a couple years. I think they've been together for about 2 years now. And cracks are starting to form, or tension, or more depth is going to be created, but within their stable, I guess is the best way to put it. As Raven beat Hoovy, now we move to Jesus Castillo, who actually has a decent promo with Gene Okerlund, which I don't know how much is attributed to Gene and how much is attributed to Jesus, but either way, Jesus talks about the fact that he just debuted last week in the WWE, or WWF, and is now champion, and that it is humbling how things can change so quickly. And he successfully defends his hardcore title in the first ever hardcore title match, the first official hardcore title match in the WWF against Hiroyoshi Tenzan. No, the hardcore title is not yet 24/7. It just debuted. I wanted another title for the guys, the lower card guys that aren't doing anything, that aren't up high enough to where they could reach the promised land of the Intercontinental title. Just a preparation title to start getting people over, to give them something to strive for on the bottom of the card. And plus, Jesus Castillo actually doesn't work for me. He works for Memphis, and I brought him in on loan with Pitbull number 2. So it was, I was sitting here laughing my butt off that, of all the people in a 25-man battle royal, the one guy that won was the guy that was on loan. And now he's champion. No, he is not close to leaving. He still has 2 appearances left, but that's not the point. It's just, of all the people in the 25-man battle royal, it couldn't have been one of the 23 people that work for me. It had to be one of the 2 people that were here on loan. Now, offering an explanation for this, Brian Pillman, in the semifinal match, or the quarterfinal match against Steve Austin for the King of the Ring, back in June actually, 2 months ago, let me start over. Back in June, Brian Pillman fought Steve Austin, his partner in the Hollywood Blondes, in a quarterfinal King of the Ring tournament match. During the match, Pillman missed a dive, like he was on, picture this. Austin's on the floor, Pillman's on the apron, he dives down with a double axe handle, trying to take out Austin. Austin moves, and Pillman lands up on the guardrail and injures his neck. We thought, at first it was a neck injury. It turned out to be a throat injury. And anybody who knows anything about Brian Pillman, he had a lot of throat surgeries when he was a kid, and he returned 2 weeks ago. Since then, Bobby Heenan and Steve Austin have not let Pillman talk. And now, because they worked last night, and Pillman didn't, Steve and Bobby have the night off, and Pillman finally has the opportunity to speak, and you could hear the struggle in his voice to speak, that, the hoarseness in his voice. You could hear him struggling with to get out every word. And Gene just finally says, "You know what, Brian, it's better that you don't talk. Let's cut the promo here, let's cut this interview here. You go rest your voice. Let's hope you get, we wish you nothing but the best. Hope you get better soon." And it starts the sympathetic build for Brian Pillman, that you see this guy struggling with every word to get every word out of his mouth, and he's still trying his hardest to speak and explain his past surgeries with his throat, and how he may never be able to talk right again. And that he may have to get another surgery to correct his voice, and that he doesn't blame Steve Austin. He doesn't blame Steve Austin for the injury. It was bound to happen eventually with his past. And it just came back to get him. It was a happenstance thing. It was an accident. It didn't, it's nobody's fault. Art Barr Mikey Whipwreck, just to calm the crowd after such a, what I would have hoped to have been just a segment to calm the crowd after what I would have hoped to have been an emotional segment, that people would have gotten emotional seeing Brian struggle and seeing Brian try and seeing, build sympathy and just build emotion, get emotional investment into Brian Pillman. Speaking of emotional investment, now we go with a different route because I don't want to keep, you gotta keep changing it up to not, get people, done, where they're finished and sick of hearing about Bret Hart and Owen Hart and their feud. So you change it up every week, week in and week out, where we take a little break from hearing interviews and we get a video package. Recently, I don't know if I talked about this in a previous video, but back at the King of the Ring, it looked like Bret could fight Owen, but in the semifinal match against Mankind, Bret injured his knee, and Mankind ended up getting the victory. Owen ended up beating Mankind in the finals of the King of the Ring. Owen, from that point forward, blamed his brother, calling him a coward for letting the injury get to him and backing out of the match, and not even mentioning the fact that he was the one that attacked his brother, because just to make sure that Bret couldn't even think about competing, somebody jumped Bret during the show, and it turned out to be Owen, which Owen admitted at Unforgiven. But then, he ran through Bret. He said he said going into the show that he would win the King of the Ring again, and he proved it. He did it. He won it again. He did something that his brother never did. The next week, Pat Patterson showed up to defend Bret Hart. For those who don't know, Pat Patterson mentored Bret Hart to a point in during this time in WWE, and Pat showed up to defend Bret Hart. Owen got fed up with Pat Patterson and ended up shoving down Pat as the show went off the air. And now we get to the point where we get to now, but prior to Unforgiven, Bret Hart had only called into Raw. He had not appeared on WWE programming since King of the Ring. And his first appearance back on television was during the Honky Tonk Show with his brother. And that's where we end the video package. It highlights everything that has happened between the brothers since since they started in WWF, all the way back from WrestleMania last year, and everything that happened at Survivor Series, everything that happened everything that has happened since Owen's attitude change last year, and ending at last night's Unforgiven pay-per-view, just as a way to make sure everybody's up to date on what has happened with Bret Hart and Owen Hart, and the fact that Bret has still never physically attacked his brother or physically laid a hand on his brother. The voiceover makes sure to point out that Bret has never hit Owen, but Owen has hit Bret. Speaking of Pitbull 2, like I mentioned earlier, Pitbull 2 against Johnny Grunge, yes, in a way this is designed to, Johnny Grunge gets like the hardcore division, to set aside the hardcore division, like Johnny Grunge gets a win, so he could be in line to face Jesus Castillo in the near future for the hardcore title. Because right now, I'm treating the hardcore title like the European title, the Intercontinental title, or any title. I don't know if I'm going to make it a 24/7 rule yet, because I just brought it in. Right now, it's got to be contested in regular matches. It's got to be just like every other title and every other promotion. It's other than the fact that every match will be contested in a hardcore match. That's the only difference between the hardcore title and any other title I have. But either way, we move to the next segment with Paul Bearer and The Undertaker, as they point out that no matter what happened to end Unforgiven, referencing Flair getting attacked, Undertaker is still the WWF champion and the new world's champion. Brian Lee, we moved to the segment that, now we're into the segments that I booked while, you guys were here. Gene asked Brian Lee what his thoughts on what happened last night, Sonny turning her back on him. And he said he bought it hard, they got him. That they played him like a fiddle. He admits when he got played, and this is one of those times where he got played. He's not afraid to admit it. But the fact of the matter is, they need to understand that it pissed him off, and that now he's out to get them back, and he won't stop until he does. And Gene asks about the Harris brothers, but just as Brian Lee is about to answer, that's when the Rock and Roll Express appear, and the Rock and Roll make sure Brian knows that whatever happens, Rock and Roll's got his back. Which now leaves a question unanswered. It used to be Brian Lee, Chris Candido, and the Harris brothers. But now that Candido showed his camp and Brian Lee showed his true colors, where does that leave Ron and Don? Tama defeats Mark Murrow, which I kind of figured was going to happen to begin with, in the semi-main. Now we go to the next one. As I mentioned earlier, J.J. Dillon will be on Raw next week to address SummerSlam and give us an update on the Nature Boy. Medusa, Debbie Malenko, is being interviewed by Wendy Richter. Debbie mentions finally beating Medusa, and that even though she beat her, it still feels like something's missing, and Medusa comes out and explains, Debbie, what's missing is the fact that you still don't know that the secret admirer letters that you thought were for me were for you. That's what's missing, Debbie. You forgot about that, and you still don't know who sent those letters to you. But I do. And the mystery continues. I mean, unfortunately, this is actually a bit of a disappointment. I mean, I could blame this slightly on maybe where we were and me not being excessively popular in the Northwest. Other than that, I can't really say, I don't really understand why this match didn't live up to the expectations, because, they're both solid in the ring, and it should have been a little bit better. I am tremendously happy to see that Owen's getting, 92 in ring performance, but I'm disappointed that they didn't do a little bit better. And that's the show. I mean, if anything, this is just a consistent episode of Raw, because I usually, or have been getting between about a 76 to a 78, 79. So this is right where I usually get, as far as show rating is concerned. I'm happy because, this has been leading to me consistently, get consistent ratings on the show and gain popularity on the pay-per-views. But either way, we're taking slow, calculated steps towards the era of Attitude, and before you know it, we will be moving in that direction, or we will get to that direction, but it's going to take a little bit of time to get there, and I hope you're enjoying the ride so far. Let me know down in the comment section below if you're enjoying a specific storyline more than the others. Let me know down in the comment section below which one that is. If you have another idea for somebody that I might not be using that you think I should be using, let me know down below as well. If you don't want to leave a comment, or if you don't want to express your liking, what you like in this series, by leaving a comment, you can always leave a like and subscribe to the channel to always know when a new video is up on the channel. But before you go, feel free to ding down the notification bell to always know any new activity on this channel, because as you saw, the name changed, and things are going to continue to change. But the one thing that will remain the same is that TEW isn't going anywhere. See you next week.